In this video, we're going to learn about how we remove waste from our body, and predominantly how we remove excess water, excess nitrogenous waste, and certain toxins from our body. There are different types of waste that are produced. First of all, there's toxins. So toxins could be ingested directly, or they could be byproducts of metabolism. We also sometimes consume excess water, and we absorb the water through the intestines, or it could be the waste product from cellular respiration. We also have excess salt. Sometimes we eat too much salt, and that can cause a change in our balance in our body, so we need to remove that. And then finally, nitrogenous waste, which is a byproduct of breaking down proteins when we have more protein in our diet than we need for maintaining our cells. So nitrogenous waste is a problem. When we consume more protein than is needed for maintaining cell growth, our bodies will break it down. And in this process of deamination, so removing the amino group from the amino acid, it is converted into NH3 or ammonia. And ammonia is very toxic to our body, so we need to get rid of it as quickly and as safely as possible. There are two different types of organisms. So osmoconformers, the organism just maintains the same solute concentration as the internal environment, so they just conform to their surroundings. Most marine invertebrates are osmoconformers. Osmoregulators would be an organism who maintains a constant internal solute concentration, so there are acceptable values. So now energy will need to be spent to make sure that the internal solute concentration is what they want. And this would include all terrestrial animals, all freshwater fish, and some marine animals. Insects use Malpighian tubules to help get rid of waste. So Malpighian tubules run the length of the insect, so it's these yellow structures right here. They look like little finger-like projections. Those tubules will draw waste into themselves and then send it to the gut. And then the waste gets mixed with the feces and eliminated via the anus. Fish are able to easily deal with the ammonia produced through deamination because they are surrounded by water. So all they need to do is release the ammonia directly into the water. Because remember, the solution to pollution is dilution, so just release it right into the water. Terrestrial animals, though, have to conserve water because water isn't always available, so they have to find other ways to remove the waste. Birds and reptiles will convert ammonia to uric acid, which will conserve water. The uric acid is a dry paste, which will be mixed with other waste and released through the cloaca as a white paste. So if you've ever had a bird poop on you, you have had uric acid dropped on you from their cloaca. Mammals produce urea, which is 100,000 times less toxic than ammonia. Urea dissolves very well in water, so it's very water soluble. So the urea is then excreted through the kidney, and that's why we urinate. So here's a picture of our kidney. The kidney is kind of a bean-shaped organ, so kidney beans. They're found at the middle, the small of our back, the lower back, and they're about a fist size in shape. And perched on top of the kidney is an organ called the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland produces many hormones, some of them involved in our flight and fight response. The cortex is the outer portion of the kidney, so this layer that doesn't really have the striping pattern. The medulla is the inner portion, and it would be wherever you see these striping patterns would be that section of the kidney, so the inner part of the kidney. These finger-like projections here, that would be the renal pelvis. So all of these stripy parts, we'll learn what they're called later, are filtering their products into the renal pelvis, and it's funneling it into the ureter, which will carry the urine to the bladder to be stored. The renal artery is the artery that feeds the kidney or sends blood to the kidney, and you can see that it is red, so it's still oxygenated at this point, but it's oxygen rich and waste rich. So there's a lot of waste in the renal artery, so it's going to get filtered out in the kidney. The renal vein will take the purified or the filtered blood back to the body, but you can see that it's blue, so it has lost oxygen along the way, so it's going to head off to the heart and then to the lungs to be reoxygenated. The functional unit of the kidney is known as the nephron, and there are about 1 million nephrons per kidney, so they're pretty important stuff. There is right here, the afferent arteriole, so it's the small vessel that's leading into this mesh of arteries or arterioles or capillaries known as the glomerulus. So it brings blood in, there's some filtering, and then the efferent arteriole brings the blood back out and sends it off to the renal vein. And then here, this is the Bowman's capsule. So it collects all the filtrate and then sends it through these structures. So the next structure is called the proximal convoluted tubule. It's proximal or in close proximity to the Bowman's capsule. And it's convoluted, it's bendy and twisty. And then the loop of Henle, it descends here, and then it ascends back up here. And then this is the distal convoluted tubule. So again, it's twisty-turny. That's where the convoluted comes from. And it's distal or distant from the Bowman's capsule and glomerulus. And then this last part right here is the collecting duct. So at this point, there's no more changes. The urine it's now called urine, it's not filtrated anymore, and it goes off to the ureter to be released from the bladder. So blood enters the kidney from the renal artery, and it moves into the afferent arteriole, as mentioned before, and that will enter the glomerulus, which is a mesh of capillaries, and then the water and dissolved particles will be pulled into the Bowman's capsule as it's passing through the glomerulus. And then the blood will exit via the efferent arteriole. So we're going to look at the filtering unit in greater detail. So this side right here is the glomerulus, so that mesh of blood vessels, and over here is the Bowman's capsule. So in the glomerulus we have our blood plasma, so the fluid portion of our blood, and then our blood cells, so these are red blood cells, you can see. And then this blue divided line is the capillary wall, and you can see that it has pores here. So it's said to be fenestrated or having pores, and it has these pores to allow the fluid out so the plasma can leave, but the cells can't leave. So that's why we don't have blood cells in our filtrate. The next structure is called the basement membrane. So that's the closest or the outermost layer of the Bowman's capsule. It covers the capillary walls, and it prevents protein molecules from being filtered out, because proteins are smaller than the red blood cells, but we don't want to lose the protein from our filtrate or from our plasma. So these are small enough to prevent the proteins from getting out. And then the Bowman's capsule, the basement membrane, is layered with these specialized cells called podocytes. And these podocytes have these little foot processes that kind of extend along, and they wrap around the capillary walls, and then there's gaps there too, so it allows substances to pass between their gaps. So the fluid portion of the blood would travel through here and then get into the filtrate. So the things that get filtered out of the blood would be all the plasma content except for protein will be pulled into the filtrate, and then all the essentials are reabsorbed back into the blood. So this is a process known as ultrafiltration, and it almost seems wasteful because you pull out everything and then put back the essentials. If you watch the crash course on filtration, Hank explains it kind of in an easier to understand way. So basically it's easier to take everything out of your fridge if you're cleaning your fridge and then just put back the things that haven't spoiled than trying to seek through and find the things that aren't needed. So the things that don't get reabsorbed become urine. So drugs, toxins, and substances that weren't fully metabolized by the body would be released nitrogenous waste or urea, extra water, and extra salt. And the whole goal of filtration and ultrafiltration is to reestablish an isotonic condition between the nephron and the surrounding capillaries. So after the filtrate has entered the Bowman's capsule, it heads over to the proximal convoluted tubule. So remember, that's that very first part right here. And almost all the filtrate is reabsorbed back to the blood here in this section. So all the glucose, the amino acids, and about 80% of the water gets reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. Sodium is actively transported from the filtrate to the space outside of the tubule, and then the chloride ions are attracted from the filtrate by the charge gradient from sodium. And then finally, water will follow by osmosis due to that increase of ion concentration outside the tubule. So then it'll enter the blood and then go back to the body. The loop of Henle is this structure right here, and as you know, it descends and then ascends back again. So sodium ions are pumped by active transport into the interstitial fluid of the medulla. So remember, the cortex is this part up here. So the tubules and the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule are found in the cortex part of the kidney, and then all of the loops of Henle and collecting ducts extend into the medulla, and that's what gives that striping pattern appearance on the cross-section of a kidney. So all of the stuff is in the interstitial fluid. The ascending limb of the loop of Henle is impermeable to water, so a hypertonic environment will be maintained here. And as the filtrate is moving down through the descending limb, the increased solute concentration, because of that hypertonic environment, causes the water to be drawn out, so more water will be reabsorbed. And then, because it's following the concentration gradient. And as the filtrate moves along the loop of Henle, it gets more and more concentrated because more water is being absorbed. Our last stage is the distal convoluted tubule. So any waste that didn't initially get filtered out in the Bowman's capsule that needs to be removed will be removed from the blood in the distal tubule, but it'll be through active transport. So we actually have to spend energy to get rid of those products. So ammonia and many drugs will be removed from the blood here, and then some essential nutrients and ions will also be reabsorbed. The collecting duct is the last stop. So from the distal tubule, the filtrate will travel to the collecting duct. It's now not called filtrate anymore, it's called urine, and it's collected in the renal pelvis, where it will eventually enter the ureter, and from there it will go to the bladder, where it's stored until it needs to be released from the body. Now, our hypothalamus does produce a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, and it's more commonly known as ADH or vasopressin, and then the posterior pituitary will release it when it is required. So nerve impulses are sent from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary to either increase or decrease ADH release. And ADH causes water to be reabsorbed from the collecting ducts when water needs to be conserved. So if our water levels are down, our thirst center in our hypothalamus will trigger the pituitary gland to release ADH, and then ADH will travel to the nephron and act on the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting ducts to make them permeable to water, and water will be reabsorbed into the bloodstream, and the urine will be made more concentrated. So you'll end up with a small volume of concentrated urine. So there are a variety of reasons why fluid levels might be down. One of them could be we've been exercising. So if we exercise, we lose water through sweating, so we need to replace that water. Overheating will lead to water loss through sweating, so we need to replace that water. If we've had blood loss through an injury, we have less blood, so there'll be less fluid, so our thirst center will be triggered to conserve that water. That's why sometimes people that have had a severe injury may feel thirsty, because it's just our body's way of trying to replace that fluid. And then finally, diarrhea can also lead to fluid levels being down and dehydration, because diarrhea is a response of the body to get rid of something really quickly, so we don't reabsorb water. We're trying to flush out whatever the offending agent is. So when water levels are up and we've had plenty to drink, the blood could become too dilute. So we've drank a large quantity of water, and ADH secretion will be inhibited. So no extra water will be reabsorbed from the collecting duct. So the result will be a large volume of dilute urine being formed. The kidney regulates blood pressure by controlling the blood volume. And this is controlled by aldosterone, which is a hormone made in the adrenal glands. And remember, the adrenal glands are perched on top of the kidneys. When you are dehydrated, you'll have low blood pressure, and aldosterone will then cause sodium and water to be reabsorbed back into the blood, which will cause an increase in blood volume, which will increase your blood pressure.